Okay, thank you. And the next presenter is Lynnette.
Good morning. I'm Lynnette Crane. The title of my presentation is Integrating Critical Thinking into University Courses, Obstacles and Solutions. What is critical thinking? I want to start with more or less a rhetorical question. How do you define this term? We've heard this term mentioned at least 2 or 3 times by the previous presenters this morning. So what do you think it is? What is the purpose? Which types of reasoning does it employ? So I always like to have a definition at hand with any presentation. You can just read it for yourselves, but overall I think we can say that it is analytical, reasoned, and goal-directed. There's an outcome, there's a reason that we use analysis for a particular purpose. All right. I am a university instructor. I teach English courses from pre-university to general ed to elective courses. I've been doing this overseas for 18 years, predominantly in the Middle East, but I've also taught in the US. So, in the academic realm, critical thinking is pretty much a buzzword. Educators are thought to be integrating critical thinking on an ongoing basis. But my question and the topic of my research is this actually taking place? And the answer is not very much, at least not to any great extent. So you can see some research that I've cited, Paul and Elder and Bartel, indicate that an overwhelming majority, 89% of university faculty, claim the promotion of critical thinking is a primary objective. Yet, isn't it interesting that only 19% could define it, and 77% had little or limited conception of how to integrate critical thinking into their course content, no matter what the course content was or is. Okay, so yes, there definitely is a problem. Critical thinking is not being integrated into university courses to any great extent, and my question is, why not? I have come up with some general categories of answers, general categories of obstacles, and first of all, I'll name them, and then I'll look at them one by one. Okay. The first, is this still on? Yeah. The first, sorry. I'm kind of a techno nerd. Is it? I can stand normally. I can't do anything normally. Okay, the first category, why it's not taking place. University instructors' knowledge of critical thinking and methodologies for integration into their course content is inadequate. The second category, administrative demands on instructors require a focus on completing the course content, applying prescribed assessment tools, and subjecting instructors to logistical limitations. And the third obstacle is the students themselves. Students' resistance to critical thinking is due to both the level of their cognitive maturity as well as inculturation, or the basic beliefs that they have about learning when they enter university, or perhaps I should say by the time that they enter university. Okay, so let's look at these categories one by one. Have you ever heard the saying, we learn what we do? So the first item that handicaps instructors as far as integrating critical thinking is that the teachers' instructional models when they were students did not include critical thinking. So surely they do not have any experience integrating critical thinking into their course content. Here's another quote from Paul and Elder. Most teachers tend to teach the way they were taught, with an emphasis on instructor-based strategies that value content acquisition over critical thought. All right. Secondly, teaching methods that focus on traditional, or what I like to call passive methodologies, do not promote critical thinking. And here are some characteristics of traditional teaching methods. I do have this on a screen later. I'm not sure if it's on the next one or not. No, it's not. So I'll just read it here. Okay, some what I like to call passive methodologies. Teacher-centered scheme. That is, the teacher is entirely focused on the course according to what he or she needs to complete, frequently dictated by administrators. All right, subject matter that is isolated from other subjects across the curriculum. Whatever course you're teaching needs to be related more broadly. Focus on memorization instead of how to arrive at an answer, how to arrive at a conclusion. The focus is on memorizing factual material. Extrinsic rewards, that is grades instead of understanding how something works, or how a conclusion was arrived at. Assessment tools which do not include higher thinking skills. This would be assessment tools using true false, multiple choice, what's your opinion, without any explanation of where those opinions came from. High competition due to lack of collaborative learning strategies. In other words, the students pitted against one another instead of working together. The classroom as the main venue, and a low tolerance for creativity or teaching in a repetitive way. Me, teacher, you students, you listen, take some notes on the facts, give it back to me in an exam. All right. As a result of this methodology, most teachers tend to teach. I already read this. Sorry. Getting a little mixed up. Did I read this? Okay, sorry. On to administrative demands. Paul and Elder, once again, point out the predominant limitations of instructors imposed administratively include limited amount of contact time with students, the classroom environment of generalized instruction and fast pace, and preset content material. These conditions only allow a minimal time spent on individual interaction or critical analysis of the course material. As a result, students tend to gear their time and attention on concrete factual learning that is likely to be assessed primarily to determine their course grade. Okay. However, before I move to the students' resistance, another item that needs to be mentioned is, as far as administrative demands. It needs to be noted that administrative demands which place limitations on the student-teacher ratio, contact hours, classroom materials, and the classrooms themselves, as well as prescribed guidelines, departmental syllabi, frequently are in fact dictated to administrators by school boards who are in turn subject and controlled by local, state, or federal entities such as ministries of education. Okay, now I'm catching up with my PowerPoint. The students' resistance to critical thinking. Today's university students, upon entry, are up against various barriers to critical thinking. Briefly, the first barrier is their less than stellar high school preparation. Many universities nowadays only require a GPA of 2.0 for university entrance. Part and parcel of the low GPA is the fact that the majority of freshman students have inadequate basic writing skills and are not accustomed to reading on a regular basis. That is to say, they are not readers in general. According to a U.S. study by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the percentage of high school students who arrive at university ready to learn independently from their textbooks, that is, through reading, is only 6%. The percentage who write well is even lower, 2%, and those who write adequately is only 31%. In tandem with education light, as I like to call it, the academically unprepared element of today's entering freshmen is students' own view about their abilities. They think that they are stellar. They think that they have graduated, they are high school graduates, they've been accepted by a university, so they think that they're intellectuals. Enculturation, or their basic beliefs about teaching and learning, include, depending on the culture, the teacher is the person who is primarily responsible for their learning. If they don't learn, if they fail on an exam, it's the teacher's fault. That sort of thing. Okay, so here's a quote from Pierce. The way students study for and think about a discipline may be highly dependent on their epistemological views of learning. Students disproportionately define learning as memorizing and thus proceed in this manner. They are taking surface approaches to learning. Additionally, the level of cognitive tasks in high school is more often tied to standardized test criteria than it is to analysis and synthesis at higher thinking levels. So, entering university students are underprepared academically. They are not aware of their cognitive deficiencies, and they have predisposed resistance to analytical thinking due to their beliefs about learning and formal education. And so it's no wonder they are frequently overwhelmed. All right, so we've taken a look at the problems. What about the solutions? And the solutions I'm presenting are more or less an overview of solutions, and I do have some specific examples and strategies, but I'd also like to hear in just a few moments some of your input, make this a little bit interactive. I know Michelle wants you to ask questions, but I'd also like to hear any suggestions from the audience. Okay, let's start with the students. Students' beliefs and attitudes towards learning need to change. And it's always risky to attempt to change attitudes in any realm. But this is exactly what needs to be done. The first step in changing students' attitudes towards deep thinking in university is to expose them to critical thinking concepts early on in high school, in middle school, and even at the primary school level. If the students' early learning experiences do not include the concept that learning is a process dependent on their input and active participation, they will certainly balk at a system that requires more intellectual work than they have previously experienced. Likewise, students with prior learning assessment tools, which only include multiple choice questions and answers of a subjective nature, undoubtedly will be uncomfortable with university assessment questions which ask them to conceptualize, analyze, synthesize, evaluate. Some of them have never even heard these terms. How can they answer questions posed in terms which with they have had little or no experience? The next way to approach changing students' attitudes and thus their behaviors towards learning lies to a huge extent in the teaching methodologies of their instructors. So really, changing students' receptiveness to critical thinking is directly linked to the way that teaching is carried out. So, moving on to teachers' knowledge and teaching methodologies. Here's a quote from Halpern. Despite all the gains that cognitive psychologists have made in understanding what happens when people learn, most teachers do not apply their knowledge of cognitive psychology. He continues, teachers need to develop a class structure which encourages creativity, reflective thinking, and self-directed learning. So, wish we had a bit more time. We could have a discussion just on those three items themselves. So, how can this be put into effect? Teachers can integrate critical thinking into courses by presenting information in different ways from the norm, in diverse ways, and using more creative formats, as well as giving students examples of what it means to think critically. Using something a bit different, students really enjoy reading nonfiction short stories about individuals and their personal learning adventures. Teachers can share stories that offer insights into concepts such as perseverance in problem solving, or demonstrating someone who took an intellectual risk by supporting an unpopular point of view in the realm of argumentation. I've taught argumentation many times, and sometimes a student might very hesitantly ask me, well, is it okay if I have this, if I take this stance? It's not what most people think or would agree with. Is it okay? Of course it's okay. You're using your own thinking. You have to come up with your supports to come up with, this is your idea, it's original, go for it. Stories, short stories can be included in lectures, and in addition to this, handouts may be provided which stress descriptive information about critical thinking. So students need to be given concrete information about critical thinking and what it is. We just can't tell them, all right, think critically, analyze, synthesize, conceptualize. Just go out there and do those things. No, they don't even know what those things are. Okay, obviously, contemporary teachers who focus solely on content knowledge and not on how to arrive at a reasoned conclusion are doing a disservice to their students. They need to change their teaching methods. It is empirical that certain instructional approaches develop and enhance critical thinking skills. So, I have a chart here. Some suggestions comparing passive teaching methodologies with progressive methodologies. Passive, teacher-centered. Progressive is student-centered, asking the students for their ideas. That's the first thing I do when I walk into a classroom. What do you think this course is about? What does it mean? How do you think you can learn about this course? What do you want to do? Of course, I have my own ideas too. Separate subject matter, integrate the subjects, focus on memorization, focus on connections, and integrating the subject and focusing on connections. Students always need to know, what does this course have to do with anything? Why am I taking this course? You have to relate it to the other subjects. You have to relate it to their major. You have to relate it to social context and to the broader world. Make your course important, because it is. Okay, I think I have to speed up a little bit because I don't have much time left, so you can see the chart yourself. Okay. Well, frequent testing versus self and peer evaluation. Students need to always be given the chance to express what they think they've learned thus far. High competition versus cooperative learning groups. Students working together. I have students work together many times to review material and to prepare test questions. I said, all right, the midterm is coming up. This group take these chapters and you come up with questions for the exam. And guess what? I'm going to use these questions in the exam. Classroom as the main venue, as opposed to various venues. Take the students out of the classroom. Which course are you teaching? Take them to an observatory. Take them to a map maker. Take them to an art museum. Whatever your course is, take them to a play. Low tolerance for creativity and encouraging them to come up with their own ideas and be creative. All right, the last hurdle, administrative demands, in many ways is the most difficult to solve. Okay, I did have a frame for this, but it disappeared. I think it fell into the ocean somewhere. I don't know. Okay, why is it the most difficult to solve? The answer, once again, has been suggested in the problem. Administrators are not the sole source of limitations placed on teachers. Policies which academic administrators must follow are set by educational boards, local political groups, funding constraints, including tax structures at sometimes, ultimately ministries of education or government bodies. So in proposing solutions which would greatly enhance the intellectual abilities of students to be thinking, reasoning members of society, and ability achieved during their university years, in the end, the major changes must come from entities in control of governing educational policies and ultimately from the society itself, from everyone. The result will be university graduates with not only a diploma, but the ability to think deeply, creatively, and critically. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lynnette. Do we have any questions? Gentleman at the back.
Thank you for presentation. I just had a couple of points. First, I don't see it accurate or even fair to say that the traditional modes of teaching and learning were very passive and there was no critical thinking. If that was the case, then the march of human civilization that we have continued, we wouldn't be where we are today. So the fact that there were people in traditional-based learning and teaching as well who questioned the existing modes of argumentation even has existed throughout the centuries. And number two, it's not always true that if there is a student-based learning or group learning, then there's definitely some critical thinking taking place there as well. So I mean, just the fact that it's very good to talk about teacher-centered and student-centered, but if there is a student-centered learning, a student-centered activities, that does not necessarily lead to learning and critical thinking. What I was looking forward to is, most of the things that you said, they are, I think in the field, quite accepted. There isn't much of a debate about the fact that students should take control of the process of learning themselves. There should be a connection between the course and, for example, the real world and the larger university structure and so on and so forth. What I was looking forward to was that if there was some data that you would have analyzed and said, okay, here is one particular example of the model of student-centered learning that I experimented with, and here is the learning outcomes that I achieved or somebody else achieved, which probably would not have been possible if the method of teaching or the environment was not traditional or was teacher-centered. That would have made the point a little more clear. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to respond briefly. First of all, I agree with what you have said, and I'll take that into consideration when I do some revisions. But I think it is safe to say, or it is empirical, in my 18 years teaching overseas, and prior to that 8 in the U.S., that teachers are pressured by administrative limitations, and that in fact, as far as testing, students, depending on the teaching methodologies, are quite geared to looking at facts and regurgitating them, rather than more than understanding thought processes.
Thanks. Earlier in your slides, you talked about 31% write accurately and that the rest of them don't. As the mother of twin boys who've just graduated from university in the U.S., I would totally agree that it's happening in the U.S., and I think it's happening at least here in Qatar. I think it's happening all over the world. But I wondered if you could give me the source or where that information came from, because I have some people I work with that say it's so bad here in Qatar. But I have twin sons, and they had all the same problems when they were 18 and went to university, and they went to excellent high schools. So I think it's a combination, like you said, take it all the way back to primary. I think we as parents have to start the children very young to say, why did that happen? And what do you think will happen next? And not, as you said, give them multiple choice all the time, because that doesn't allow them to expand in things. So if you could go back to you said 31%.
Yes, I have my
okay.
references,
Thank you.
and I have a reference sheet, and if you give me your, if anyone wants the references, just give me your email address and I'll send you the entire paper. And yes, I think that sometimes we're just not demanding enough of students, and to encourage them to always be asking of them when they pose an answer, to ask them for more, probing deeper. Well, why do you think this? I remember very early on in my university instruction, one of my first university instructors, some student was answering a question, and I think he said, well, I believe such and such. And he said, stop. He said, I want you to know the difference between belief and thought. And that was one of the greatest springboards for me as a university student.
Thank you, Lynnette. The next presentation is called Corey. Thank you.
Hello and good morning. My name is Corey Harvey, and I am from Western Washington University. That is not Washington, D.C., that is the state of Washington. We are about an hour and a half north of Seattle. We're very close to Vancouver, so I've gotten into the practice of telling people that I'm from Seattle, not from Washington, because they think I'm from Washington, D.C. Before I get into my presentation, I did actually want to extend a couple of thank yous to some folks here. First of all, the audience, people that have come to listen and to participate in a conference of this nature. Also to my fellow presenters today and for the information that they are presenting and the work that they have done. To Michelle, our facilitator and moderator today, in handling a cross-cultural dialogue that can be difficult. And also to the organizers and the hosts of this conference. It is certainly no easy affair to carry out a conference of this magnitude. I am a person that has been to all four of the Thinking and Speaking a Better World conferences, 3 in Slovenia and now here in Qatar. And it is a pleasure to be able to visit a different part of the world. It is a pleasure to be able to participate in a cross-cultural discussion and a cross-cultural dialogue. I think that Professor Snyder last night said it quite well when he called for not a dialogue necessarily, but a multi-logue, wherein we're hearing from a wide variety of perspectives and different experiences in informing us about some of these things that we're all trying to address in different parts of the world. And I apologize ahead of time for my poor pronunciation when I say this, but I would say shukran and ma'asalame. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here in this culture and to share different ideas back and forth. You may have seen in the program, I have to actually check the program to see the title of my presentation as well. It is Classroom Pedagogy for Citizen Advocates, Utilizing Debate and Critical Thinking Tools to Encourage Active Civic Engagement. The background for this is that I teach at Western Washington University. Western Washington is a mid-sized regional university. We have about 13,000 students, only about 600 or 700 graduate students. It is a teaching university. That is our focus, not necessarily research. We leave that to the University of Washington in Seattle for the most part. We focus primarily on teaching undergraduate students. The courses that I teach, or some of the courses that I teach, are an introduction to argument theory. We call it exposition and argumentation, and it is largely for introductory students on an introductory level. We get students from across the board in a multidisciplinary fashion. We get students who are communication students, but we also get students who are chemistry and biology students and art students and economics and business and philosophy, a wide range of different students. The course is something that we call a GUR, a General University Requirement. It is a course that all students are required to take, or it is one of a set of courses that all students are required to take for graduation in the field of the humanities. Because of this, one of the things that we experience is that we often have students that have very, very little experience in argumentation, very little experience with debate, with communication, with rhetoric, with critical thinking. And I would speak to very quickly the question that was raised by the gentleman from the back to Lynnette's presentation about the issue of critical thinking in the classroom. I think that both are probably correct, that we certainly have made great strides with education and using critical thinking in the classroom, yet we still have great strides yet to make. Teaching incoming students in a college setting in the United States. I don't know exactly what it is like for many of the countries that you teach in. I have some idea from having listened to others. But in the United States, we find that our students enter college rather unprepared for college. They reach the university setting having never been asked to think for themselves. They, in the United States, we have a problem that we call teaching to the test, as I'm sure that happens across the world, where we have standardized testing. And as a result, we're seeing issues like social sciences and the humanities and liberal arts being pushed out of the curriculum in favor of math and English skills and science skills, which are no doubt important. They are clearly important skills for people to have, but so are the social sciences, so are the humanities, the liberal arts. And so we're seeing a shortage of skill and expertise in those areas. We might not expect expertise from our incoming students, but we're also experiencing a very significant shortage of experience and familiarity with critical thinking. I think it was mentioned in the panel discussion last night, I forget exactly who mentioned it, but that students are rarely asked what they think. They're told what to think. Rote memorization and reprocessing of information that has been shared. And so that is a problem that we see often, and we're trying to address some of those questions. The course that we teach there, we handle about 600 or 700 students per year that go through the course, which is a fair amount of students to be handling over the course of an academic calendar. We try to use academic debate as a model to help us learn argumentation, critical thinking skills, research skills, communication, and so forth. But we also recognize that most of our students will never see time on a competitive debate team. When we take into account the number of students that we process, if we were to ask ourselves how many of them will ever participate in competition, competitive academic debate, I would think that the percentage is very, very low. 1, 2, certainly not more than 5% will ever find themselves in a situation where they're competing on a debate team. So we try to approach our argumentation courses from the perspective that we are teaching debate to non-debaters in an attempt to move away from the competition and move more toward the real-world application of some of these skills. For all of us are advocates. We'll all be advocates in our regular lives, whether it's in our family, whether it is in our community, in our nation, whether it is globally, for whatever purpose. We will all be advocates in one way or another, and so we're trying to approach debate for non-competitive debaters. The 3 particular skills that we try to approach throughout the course of this class are critical thinking, research, and communication. I think a very nice job was done of defining critical thinking. I think that most of us don't go to the effort of defining critical thinking, what it is, how it operates, and so forth. I kind of tend to, with my students, I tend to define critical thinking as simply, in a very, very simple form, the willingness to question. That it's okay to question why things are the way they are, rather than simply accepting them as they are. In the United States, where I'm from, there's a popular bumper sticker, a sticker that you place on windows and the bumper of your car and so forth. And this sticker says, "Question authority." I would change that sticker just slightly, and I would say, question everything. It's okay to ask questions for why things are the way they are, rather than simply accepting something because your mother told you, or because your college professor told you, but rather to find some of those answers yourself, and you have to do that through investigation, through inquiry, through research, through critical thinking, from looking at an issue from a multitude of perspectives. I will tell my students, if you only read the conservative news, you're missing out. If you only read the liberal news, you're missing out. If you only read the radical news, you're missing out. We need to encourage our students to pursue information from a broad variety of perspectives and then compare them against one another. I think that Professor Williams last night in the discussion talked about how Hegel's theory of thesis and antithesis. When we have a thesis, we have an antithesis, and we create synthesis, but then the process doesn't end there. The synthesis becomes the new thesis. We have a new response, antithesis, and we pursue additional synthesis. It's a continuing process that we continue to pursue answers, we continue to inquire, to investigate, to search for the answers in our society. The second skill that we try to approach with our students is that of research. It is kind of a logical, progressive step from critical thinking. We think critically about the issues that we're facing. We look at it from many different perspectives and angles. We raise questions as to why things are the way they are, things that we don't understand, that we need additional confirmation or additional clarification. Then we have to seek answers for those questions that we have raised. When we do that research, we try to pursue that research from a variety of different perspectives. I try to tell my students that they should look at a number of different sources of information, not just political ideology, but also the function of the source. For instance, looking at newspapers can be a very valuable source of information because they provide timeliness. They provide up-to-date information. Yet newspapers rarely offer a lot of depth and detail. So they need to not stop at newspapers. They need to go beyond newspapers and look to journals, academic journals. They need to look to books and so forth. A book does not have quite the same timeliness as a newspaper article, but it offers the depth of analysis and evaluation that a newspaper article does not. We also encourage them to look at government documents. Those things that are produced by think tanks and departmental agencies and offices and organizations, because that is where you find some of the substance, the real data that drives some of our conversations. As we teach our students about things like the Stephen Toulmin model of argumentation, the things that are necessary to be present for a complete argument, we all learn that it takes more than simply a claim to make an argument. A claim is a nice first step. It is the beginning of an argument, but it is not the end of an argument. It is the first step that we take. One of the things that I sometimes will show to my classes that you might be interested in, there is a Monty Python clip. Some of you might be familiar with the British comedy group Monty Python. And they have a particular skit, a clip that they call the Argument Clinic. Sometimes we use comedy to teach our students. And in this particular skit, John Cleese goes into the argument clinic. He's seeking an argument, and instead of an argument, he gets a contradiction. When he says yes, the other person says no. He says yes, the other person says no. And his argument is that that is not an argument, but rather a contradiction. Yet oftentimes when we see argument taking place around us in the world, whether it's in our families, whether it's informal argument between neighbors, or even between countries of differing opinions, we often hear one side saying yes and the other side saying no. One side says yes, the other side says no, and we only have contradiction. We don't have explanation. We don't have reasoning. We don't offer substantiation to validate our claims. We simply have a contradiction. And so we offer our students the incentive, or we try to incentivize and motivate them to do depth of research, to look deeply into an issue so that they find the substance to back up their claims. And finally is this idea of communication. The third skill that we try to develop is an idea of communication. Once we have critically evaluated and critically assessed an issue for its significance, its meaning, we've raised questions, then we've done a little bit of research based on those questions that we've raised, then we have some answers through our research. We've gained some knowledge, we've gained some awareness, and we can validate some of our claims. But all of that knowledge that we gain, all of that information that we've gathered is largely of little value unless we share that information with someone else. If we use that information to try to influence the outcome of decisions, whether that is on a personal level, a family level, a municipal level in your own city, a state or prefecture or province, or your country or the world, or anything in between, is to share that information. So we try to encourage our students to be advocates. The textbook that we use for this course is a textbook that we have written, and it is called Understanding Argument: The Journey from Consumer to Critic, from Critic to Advocate. The reason we look at it this way is that argumentation really is a journey. It is a process. It is an ongoing thing that we do. We begin by being consumers. We all consume arguments on a daily basis. I don't know about other countries necessarily, but in the United States, research indicates that every one of us in the United States is subject to at least 3,000 subtle advertisements per day. Every single day we are bombarded by advertisements, whether that is on television in the form of an advertisement or a commercial, or whether it is subtle advertisements such as the label on someone's clothing, whether it is the lyrics to the music that we are listening to, whether it is a lecturer in a classroom making an argument, whether it is having an informal argument with friends in the hallway between classes, that we hear argument over and over and over and over and over again. What we're trying to encourage our students is to not simply consume that information, not simply consume that argument, but to be critical of those arguments, to recognize when those arguments are being given to us, to question the motivation behind those arguments, to challenge the validity of those arguments, and then, and perhaps the most important step or most critical step that is often left out, to respond, to react, to have communication that offers either endorsement of the argument that we have heard or rejection of the argument that we have heard. So we're trying to encourage our students to communicate in a way that is meaningful for themselves, their family, their community, their state, their nation, their world, etc. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. The thing that we are trying to approach and address is whether or not we should be looking at the issue of civic engagement in our argument classes. I think all of us agree that argument skills, critical thinking skills, rhetoric, communication, research, that these are all highly valuable skills and competencies for people to have for a variety of different reasons. Yet I have found in my experience that the focus or the emphasis is put on competition in a lot of instances, the debate team, where we try to channel our students into the competitive forensics environment. Or it is put on purely academic means where we're trying to create better researchers, better orators, more highly skilled workers. And so there's also a financial component where we're trying to create skills that can get someone a high-paying job. Now, I'm not going to criticize any of those reasons or justifications because I think all of them are important and they're all necessary. But I would question why we continue to de-emphasize or why we continue to deprioritize the use of debate and argumentation, rhetoric skills in teaching civic engagement. So perhaps the first question we should ask ourselves is, why are we not looking at those issues? And there are probably a number of different reasons why we're not looking at civic engagement. I already mentioned a few: competition, financial reward. We're trying to turn social sciences into a hard science so that we can compete with the hard sciences for dollars or for funds, for money. Also, there is a lot of times many of the instructors are overworked and we feel overwhelmed and it's difficult to look into some of those issues. And sometimes we're concerned that it makes our classroom a little bit overly political and that we shouldn't be addressing political issues in our classroom. I would tend to disagree with that idea. I would argue that there's a difference between being political and being partisan. Everything we do is political in nature, at least in education. It has a political component. I don't care what my students' partisan association is. I don't care what party they belong to. I don't care how they vote. I just care that they vote. I care that they pay attention to the issues, that they are an active member of some of those things that are going on in the world around them. So if we ask our question, they ask the question, should we be using civic engagement as an important goal in our argumentation classes? I think that there are a number of reasons why we should. The panel discussion that we listened to last night was, I think, very informative in telling us why we should be using a goal or an objective of civic engagement in our argument classes, on our debate teams, in our communication courses, and in our communication departments. Because we are living in a world facing very, very difficult problems. We live in challenging times. These are indeed interesting times that we live in, and challenging times that we live in. The thing that I tell my students is that there are a number of issues in the world that will affect you. They will affect you whether you want them to or not. Why not learn a little bit about those issues, develop some of the skills that allow you to be an advocate, and then try to affect those issues in a direction that benefits you, benefits your family, benefits the people that you care about, your community, your neighborhood, your nation, the environment, the economy, gender relations, social relations, whatever the situation might happen to be, to try to affect those issues back. I would also look to a personal favorite of mine, what was mentioned last night, that we've had many teachers throughout history that have raised the call to action, to be involved in some of these issues that are happening in our societies, rather than being an observer and part of the audience, but rather being a participant in some of these issues, and that is Martin Luther King Jr. He comes from my own country, and so it is part of my own background, something that I treasure personally. A particular quote that I find very inspiring is, he says, "We will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." He's saying that it is not the words of our enemies that will hurt us. It is the silence of those who pretend to be our friends or who claim to be our allies that will end up hurting us. We need people to be engaged. We need people to be involved. We need people to be what I would call citizen advocates, not just citizens. Everyone is a citizen of one place or another. But when we talk about a good citizen typically means someone who obeys the laws, pays their taxes, and votes every 3 to 5 years, depending on your electoral cycle. But I would argue that we need to have citizen advocates, those people who go beyond the mere bare minimal level of participation in society and actually participate in the civic dialogue, public discussions that go beyond the classroom setting to try to engage the world that is around them. And I think that argumentation classes can do that for us. Argumentation courses and debate teams can do that for us because they do a couple of things. First of all, they provide tools. When we talk about an artisan or a person who is involved in a trade, they have a toolbox. And we're trying to add tools to that toolbox through critical thinking, through research, through communication. But in addition to those tools that we're trying to add, we need to add experiential learning that goes beyond the classroom. I would encourage any of you, and we've heard this already before, I would encourage any of you that teach to take your students outside of the classroom, to encourage them to go beyond their school campus or their college campus, to seek out issues that are happening in the society around them and to engage those issues, to be a participant, an active member of the surrounding society, and to become a participant rather than simply an observer. Again, I would thank those of you for all that you add to the students in our lives that we're trying to encourage to be more active participants in the world that surrounds them. And I look forward to any shared and collaborative efforts that we might take in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Corey. Is there any question Corey's presentation. Thank you. The gentleman at the back, please.
My question in Arabic, please. Okay. شكرا على هذا العرض. حقيقة المؤتمر يحمل عنوان مهم جدا، وإن كان هناك بعض التداخلات في المفاهيم، فمفهوم المناظرة والحوار والمناقشة وطرح الأسئلة والإقناع ومهارات الإصغاء والاستماع والتفاعل الإنساني ولغة الجسد هي جميعها مهارات الاتصال والتواصل. وأنا أتنقل منذ الأمس بين القاعات يعني لعلي أجد ضالتي، ولكن لم أجدها في العروض العربية، فقلت قد أجدها في العروض الأجنبية، ولكن وجدت الأمر هو نفسه، هي مجرد كلام نظري. لم أجد يعني شيء تطبيقي أو فعلي. كيف نستفيد، كيف نوظف مهارات التفكير الناقد، مهارات الخطابة؟ ما استمعت إليه منك ومن زميلتك السابقة هو مجرد مقالات فقط، وليس هناك أمور بحثية. نريد أن نفهم كيف نخلق من طلبتنا طلبة قادرين على التفكير الناقد، قادرين على استخدام مهارات الحوار والمناقشة والخطابة. شكرا.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think that this is a very important issue. We speak of the theoretical application of these ideas, the academic application of these ideas, and given another 25, 30 minutes of time, I would love to go more into depth in that question. What I would suggest is that your students survey your own community. The community, not necessarily what's happening in Japan, not necessarily what is happening in Norway, what is happening in your community, and do outreach to those organizations in your community that are addressing those issues. One of the things that we do at my university, we encourage our students to seek out organizations in the surrounding community that are addressing social problems. And then we invite them to campus to have public debates on campus about those issues. We employ something that we call the Let's Talk Dialogue series. It is a series of regular discussions on campus where we invite people from the community to have a discussion about those social problems, those social challenges. And we do that in a number of different formats, in a number of different ways. We might have a panel discussion. We might have an open conversation, but we also require our students to do research ahead of the conversation so that they are coming to that discussion with an informed perspective. They're not just coming to learn, they're coming to teach. They're coming to educate. And that is one way that we have found that has been profoundly productive, at least in our community, in engaging the local organizations that are dealing with controversial issues. If we don't use argumentation to address controversial issues in our society, then I think we have lost the real purpose of argumentation, because as soon as argumentation loses its application to social conflict and social problems, then it truly becomes purely theoretical and no application.
I'm sorry, we don't have any more time for any more questions. I'm sure that Corey would be happy to speak to you at the end of this session, which is now. Thank you all, Mita, Andreas, Corey, and also Lynnette, for your fantastic presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I now believe it's a 15 minutes coffee break. Thank you.